Good evening, everybody. Welcome inside the Villanova Basketball Report. It's live here on Bob Long Sports. Bob Long, we got a full studio here tonight alongside me to my left, Kevin Long, and to his left, Tom Trainer. Well, Villanova back, guys, on the winning track, winning 2 games this week. First against Marquette. Very, very encouraging for about 30 minutes, holding on for dear life for the last 10. And then in the Temple game, holding on for dear life in the first half and very convincing in the second. And this is something we've talked a lot about, but we'll talk about it on a continuous basis here over the course of these shows, or at least until they do put together a full 40 minutes of Villanova basketball. But 2 wins are 2 wins. Seton Hall coming back to the earth here, and the Big East race wide open as we head into the final 3 weeks of the regular season. Kevin Long, we'll start with you. Your thoughts on the week that was, what stood out to you, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, another wild week in the Big East. Great win against Marquette. My one concern coming out of that game is we still don't know who our best defender is necessarily. We're still trying to figure out how to guard a Marcus Howard or a Miles Powell, and it seems like they continue to put Saddiq Bey. It seems to be the guy that they go to most often, but I'm not sure if he really is the best guy for that job, and we're really just having a tough time stopping, some of those star players. And as for the Temple game, obviously a really disappointing first half. Really struggled to score the ball in the first half, other than Colin Gillespie. I mean, I don't even know if you win that game. I know they won by 20, but without Colin playing as well as he did in the first half, I'm not sure if Villanova can come back from that. Earl getting in foul trouble early certainly helped or hurt them, and then he came back strong in the second half. So I've been really impressed with the way that he's come along this year. I think that he has had a really strong, especially Big East season so far, and you can tell he's a big difference maker for this team on the court.
Tom, your thoughts on the past week that was, we'll start with you on the Marquette game, because I think when we talk about this Villanova team, they'll certainly be defined by the remainder of their Big East schedule. In fact, it's really amazing. Adam Zagoria, along with others, threw a statistic out there that Villanova-Temple game is the only game this year played between non-conference Power 5 or Power 6 type teams after February 1st of this entire basketball season. So the Big Five keeping things like that alive. They do that from time to time, but the rest of this year will be defined by the Big East. So what did you see against Marquette?
Well, in the Marquette game, I think we finally saw what we had been looking for a while now, which was a hot start from the offense and consistently hitting the 3 ball, spreading it around. Really, the offense was the game changer in that game. I would say overall, Kevin makes a good point that we have struggled guarding individual star players, but I have seen a defense that is much more cohesive and a solid whole, much better job rotating, better job rebounding, and they just are more aware and playing as a team out there defensively, so I've been impressed with that. But the first thing that came to mind in the Marquette game is definitely the hot start. It didn't feel like we were still getting off the bus or playing catch-up the entire first half, which has been the case a lot this season, even in games where we have won comfortably. For example, the Temple game comes to mind from this past week as well. And Colin Gillespie has been the go-to X factor for us, but it hasn't just been him. I mean, if you look down the roster, we have 5 guys who are averaging double figures. We're still very much a team that spreads the ball, and a lot of guys contribute. Colin has been definitely leading of late, and it's been great to have that go-to player when the rest of the team is struggling, and there have been a few games where Saddiq Bey has cooled off a bit. So I think we have a very balanced team, especially defensively. They seem to be figuring things out at the right time, and I think this is a good sign leading into the remainder of Big East play and the conference tournament.
Sure, and with relation to Colin Gillespie, the consistency of the starting 5 is certainly encouraging, but even Colin Gillespie as a whole, 15 going on 16 points per game after the big performance against Temple, but only twice in the entire 2019-2020 season has he scored less than 10 points in a basketball game, the last of which was January the 4th in a 71-60 loss against Marquette. So not only can he go off and have those big games, but he's also going to give you those 10, 12, 15-point performances on the regular that allows the rest of the team around him to kind of build off that benchmark. And honestly, guys, we were talking about this off air, but the point guards that this program has brought in the last 3 iterations since the down years of 2012, 2013, Ryan Arcidiacono, Jalen Brunson, National Player of the Year, and Colin Gillespie, who knows what his accolades are going to be by the end of it. We saw Arcidiacono on Wednesday get his number retired, and deservedly so, in the Villanova Wall of Fame. Colin Gillespie having an incredible career for this Villanova team, an under-recruited Division II type guy after his junior year at Archbishop Wood locally here. And all of a sudden, an all-time great and a guy headed towards Arcidiacono and Brunson status, a guy that if he plays another year like he does this year and next year, will absolutely have his number in the rafters by the time it's all said and done.
Yeah, I don't remember, honestly, the last time I've seen one guy take on so much for this Villanova basketball team. If you look back to the days of Ryan Arcidiacono, especially at the end of his career, he had a lot of support around him. He had a lot of good players. Obviously, Jalen Brunson, throughout his entire career, had a lot of help around him. Even last year, Phil Booth was the guy, but he had Eric Paschall, who was a seasoned veteran, had been there. And it seems to all fall on Colin Gillespie's shoulders now. He's he needs to dribble the ball. He needs to handle the ball. There's maybe, other than Moore and Bay, those are your next best ball handlers. He's getting all the assists. He's scoring a lot of the points. Everything falls on him. I'd be interested to see what percentage of points he contributes to, whether that's an assist or a point or however else he may be able to affect the play. I'd be interested to see the percentage of points that he is contributing towards, because I bet that it's the highest percentage in a while from any one player on this Villanova team.
And an unsung hero that I would add is Jeremiah Robinson Earl. He's, a freshman who is almost averaging a double-double. Mm-hmm. He's a half rebound shy on average of averaging a double-double in his freshman season. And the great thing about the kid is his attitude. And we know that's what Villanova preaches, is attitude. But he seems very happy, a blue chip recruit from IMG Academy, who many people thought may have been a one-and-done prospect. Comes in here, and he's happy to do the dirty work.
Many thought was going to stay in Kansas from Overland Park.
Sure.
They wanted him badly, and he came to Villanova. Tremendous get there for Jay Wright. Totally an unsung hero. If I may, I wish his rebound total was just slightly less, which would mean that he's a better finisher at the hole, wouldn't get his own caroms. But honestly, that's a nitpick there. I think that's one thing that, whether he is one and done or not, as his basketball career continues here at Villanova and then at the next level in the NBA at some point, that's really the one part of his game. And a little bit of strength, too, and I don't think those are entirely different. There's some interrelation there. His physicality, which he will continue to grow into his freshman body, and his ability to finish right at the hole. But he has been fantastic, and yes, this team would be in an entirely different place without him.
Yeah, and you're starting to see him get a little bit of confidence in himself. He's starting to take that three-pointer with a little more freedom. He was a little bit hesitant in the start of the season, but that type of stuff will really open up his game. And and he helps bring up the ball every once in a while as well too. When you need him to, you feel like he may be that next guy that can help out. You don't necessarily trust Jermaine Samuels bringing up the ball. He's usually going straight to the hole. So Robinson Earl has been turning into one of those guys that they can really rely on.
Yeah, it's been certainly a great last week or so for Villanova, a bounce back, and you're seeing some of those players come into their role. Jeremiah Robinson Earl, Jermaine Samuels getting healthier, Colin Gillespie taking over when needed. Even Sadiq Bey, just 10 points and 9 points in his 2 most recent games, 29 and 22 in the 2 games prior to that. Those were losses, but you're seeing the consistency from him. The last 2, maybe not quite as much, but he is a guy, along with Gillespie, that are really your bell cows for this Villanova team. We're also going to go to the whiteboard at some point here in the show relatively soon and do a V's and O's segment on ball movement. And we're going to highlight one particular play in general, but it's more emblematic of what happened in the second half, and we'll break down a little bit of the difference between the second half and the first half. And this one particular possession that ended with a 3 and kind of a dagger, the lead extended to 14 at that point. It's going to be a fun walkthrough, because as it was happening live, you're sitting there thinking, wow, that is how Villanova can wear down opposing defenses. And a team like Temple, maybe not quite the discipline that they needed to in the second half. Also, Villanova just so hot from three. When the ball movement creates the type of threes where you're stepping into it and you're having some late help from the defense, that's a lot different than some of the get down the floor and jacket like we've seen when the offense is a bit more stagnant. And again, I think it's still about getting it for 40 minutes if you're Jay Wright and this coaching staff, but you're seeing the seeds being planted in a very young team that we didn't know from the beginning of the year, guys. Is this a team that could make a deep run in the NCAA tournament? Is this a 3 seed? Is this a 2 seed? We didn't know for a long time. The record, I thought, was artificially buoyed for a while. Then I think the 3 losses in a row, that was maybe a bit overstated because of the teams that they played. I thought they played very well against Butler. They played pretty well against Seton Hall. The Creighton game is the one that bugs you. So, again, maybe overinflated in the beginning. The last 3 weeks, it's not as bad as it seems. And now you have a team growing and I think finally starting to hit their stride on both the offensive and the defensive end.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily look at the Creighton game as a bad loss.
Yeah,
they've been hot over the past couple of weeks here.
The way they lost, I was not thrilled with.
Sure.
A slow start, unable to come back. Where was the energy that we saw in the second half and the first? If you play with that for 40 minutes, you win the game. That's all I mean there.
Right, and it's been sort of the same story all year. Just a a game that they couldn't come back from. But having them at about 12, I believe they are right now. So on that 3-4 line, I think that's about what we would expect at this point. Possibly exceeding expectations from before this season, really. So I'm happy with where they are. I think that the Big East is certainly getting their proper respect this season. Obviously, 3 losses over the past 2 weeks, and Villanova only dropping to 12. That certainly shows some respect towards the Big East and Seton Hall and the way that they've been playing. And there's just a lot of great teams in this conference. Now, all of a sudden, Providence at 12 losses, maybe they're back in the picture with a big win against Seton Hall. Definitely need to make some noise in the Big East tournament in order to make a run. But I think that I would say Villanova is right about where we thought they might be on the 4 line. And, it'll be interesting to see how some of these young guys react getting into March, into Big East tournament, and then eventually into the NCAA tournament.
Bob, what do you think? Do you think they are still an overrated basketball team? I remember about a month ago when they would lose a few, drop to 15, then they'd win a couple, go back up to about 10, and you seem to think they were that 15, between 15 and 20 seem to be where they belong. Do you think 12 at this point is still an overrating?
I think it's closer now probably than it was a couple of weeks ago. I think they are starting to play better basketball. And this isn't just the contrarian coming out here. It's, yes, I know they've lost a lot of games recently, but what I saw in those games was a team that was starting to get their act together and a team that was starting to put it together. But, yeah, I mean, if you watched the first 20 minutes of the Villanova-Temple game, you'd say this isn't a ranked team, period. Then if you watched the second half of that game in a total vacuum, you took the names off the jerseys, you'd say, I mean, my goodness, this looks like the 2018 team, the way they're shooting it from 3. So the question is going to be consistency going forward. They can beat anybody. I just wonder what that consistency looks like for 40 minutes. If they hit a lull in the first round of the NCAA tournament, can they bounce back? Is Cole Swider going to be a really strong member of this team offensively going forward? Can he hack it enough defensively to even be in that discussion? And then you're going to ask a lot out of your freshmen for the time that they're going to need to play in the NCAA tournament. So to answer your question, I would say probably slightly, but I actually feel more like they're a top 15 team now than I did before their losing streak. And I think the reason is I'm seeing more maturity, and I'm seeing Colin Gillespie take his game to a different level, something that can allow Justin Moore and a Cole Swider and guys like that to get minutes and be active in the game without being as counted upon as they otherwise would. And I'm going to throw Jermaine Samuels into that category as well. He's a really good third, well, I'm going to call him a really good 4th option that's probably serving as a 3rd, but Robinson Earl taking that spot there as well, 3 and 3A. Samuels getting healthy is huge. and having Sadiq Bey and Colin Gillespie take the brunt of it is allowing Jermaine Samuels to be what he is, which is primarily an off-ball slasher, a guy who can get to the rim when he's not the primary source of the defense's attention.
It was about this time last year where Jermaine really stepped up his game leading into the conference tournament, and then he was he the tournament player? He wasn't he the most valuable player of the tournament last year?
I don't remember.
Or was that a Booth or a Paschall? I'm not sure, but I do know that Jermaine seemed to hit timely shot after timely shot towards the end of last season. So it'd be great to see him get going. But, I mean, you just look down the roster, and they don't have the depth that they've had in the past. And
That's right.
And last year was a different sort of lack of depth where it was you had two guys and nobody else. This year it's like I think we have a solid five, but then you just mentioned Swider, and then if you mentioned Slater, and then after that there's Brian Antoine, and then
Cosby Roundtree.
Right, Cosby Roundtree, who what are your guys' thoughts on Cosby Roundtree? Because if you asked me 2 years ago, I would have expected I would have expected him to develop into maybe not quite an Ochefu level player.
Yeah, I thought he was going to be a Will Sheridan, a guy who maybe could develop a little face-up game, was never going to be a guy that had the best offensive skills. He just wasn't built that way. But a solid defender, a good rebounder, and just generally a defender who would be in the right spot. You're not getting much of any of that. He's not in the right spot defensively, so he's not getting rebounds. And more importantly than that, he's not getting chances to get rebounds because he's a liability. He's making wrong decisions on high ball screens, and you just can't have him out there on the floor.
And it's shocking, I mean, because we're not at practice. So you don't see what's going on in terms of the development process week to week, day to day. But he's always struck me as a guy who's locked in. Great attitude, positive.
I'll give you all that.
Would be willing. He seems like the guy who'd be a coachable player. So it's shocking to not see the development that you'd expect. So I just wonder.
I wonder what the missing variable is there. What could it possibly be?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Kind of. And I don't really want to go there because I don't know. I don't know what his basketball IQ is, but it doesn't look great out there.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of developing into, like, you know, for lack of a better player, Darrell Reynolds. Like he came in looking better than Darrell, absolutely, but now he's sort of gone back to this role where, you know, he sees the floor in minutes where we're in foul trouble, and, you know, Jeremiah Robinson Earl needs to come out of the game, and we need to cover someone else's big, and that's about all that he can do. You know, he really.
I would say he's regressed past Darrell Reynolds. I think Darrell Reynolds was a much more, especially in 2018.
His senior year. Give Darrell Reynolds credit because he was not a Big East player for the large majority of his career. I think he'd even tell you that, right? But he became a very serviceable player because he was always in the right position. You were never going to be scared of him with his back to the basket if you were guarding him. But he understood spacing, positioning, got rid of the ball offensively when he needed to. He was a serviceable player.
He held his own when we needed to in that 2016 national championship against that big North Carolina team. He held his own.
Yep. And I think it was because Ochefu got hurt midway through that year, right? When he got some extra time and he got to start for a little while. And, you know,
remember that St. John's game? Do you guys remember that? He had 18 points and it was like, wow, this is the coming out party. It didn't quite go that way, but it was the beginning of things to come for Darrell.
But that's something that Cosby Roundtree could obviously use. I mean, anyone could use a nice 18-point game to boost your confidence. But at this point, you know, how is Demir going to get back into this? He's getting 6 minutes a game and not scoring many points, and he gets pulled right back out as soon as someone else is ready to get back on the floor. There's no way for him to really get back into this, and nor should Jay really give him all that much of a chance. You know, he's a defensive liability. He never quite had that offensive game, and quite frankly, we just have a strong starting five right now. So, and, you know, to go back to your point, Tom, I think that depth is going to be the issue for this team, similar to what it was last year. And, you know, I think they have a top 15 starting five, but they do not have a top 15 bench by any stretch.
Yeah, just to not belabor the Demir point too much, but let's talk ratios here, right? If I had a ratio for the amount of defensive possessions that he has been on the floor, better yet, possessions where he's either had to be on the ball or had to defend a high ball screen, the ratio of that to the amount of times that Villanova's gotten beat with a slip screen and the big man cutting to the hole unguarded for a dunk is way too high. Way too high. It would be way too high on an absolute basis, and on a relative basis, it just tips the scales. That's the issue, and it's sad to see Jay yell at him and take him right off the floor after a play like that, but he has no choice. Just the way we've seen in games like when Butler came to the Pavilion. Now we'll switch to Cole Swider, where whoever Cole Swider would pick up on the defensive side, he started on their big. He got the back to the basket, backed him down because he's a little too soft and finished. And then Villanova switched him to the next guy, and Butler fed it to that gentleman on the post, and he beat Swider. And Jay had to pull him out. We didn't see him for the rest of the half. You know, as a coach, you don't really have a choice when it's that glaring of a liability. And unfortunately, with Cosby Roundtree and Swider, two guys with size that you want to box out and play defense for you, he doesn't have that luxury. It makes it tough.
Yeah, we talk a lot on this show about, you know, some of the shortcomings, and we've certainly harped on Tamir.
Yeah, we have. Sorry about that. That's probably driven by me.
And Cole, and in years past, more Jermaine than we have this year. But, you know, overall, this was a great week for this team.
Yes.
This was a great week against a great game against Marquette. Good win. Good win against Temple, you know, not the first half we were expecting, but, you know, this is right where you want this team to be in March. I think this is a better position than any of us thought that they would be in coming into this. I don't think we maybe foresaw, you know, Justin Moore being as good as he is now. Nobody saw Colin Gillespie blossoming into the player that he is right now, and Villanova basketball is really in a great spot. You know, they're in a spot to put themselves at least into the second weekend in this NCAA tournament and hopefully defend their title in the Big East.
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible to defend their title in the Big East, and you know, a big reason why is the struggles of Seton Hall. And meanwhile, you look at Villanova's schedule for the next week. Again, there are no easy games in this conference. DePaul takes Villanova to overtime on Villanova's home floor just a few weeks ago. But a Wednesday night tilt, 9 o'clock tip at Wintrust Arena in downtown Chicago where DePaul plays. That's exciting. That's big time. Should be a great game there. A late tip, stay up. And then on Saturday, it's on the road at Xavier, Cincinnati, Ohio. So 2 tough games there. Xavier saves their season last night, Monday evening, as they take down St. John's in a game where they trailed for the majority of that second half and scrounged their way to a victory in the final minute. Good for them. They played Villanova really tough. You look at their record and think, under 500 in the Big East. This Xavier team is tough. They're 16-9. They are on the brink of an NCAA tournament bid. They just need to finish strong, finish weak, and they're not going to get in. That's a team that is motivated to go out there and win and will be a struggle. The athleticism of Najee Marshall jumps off the page at you. Big left-handed specimen that can cut to the basket, developing a better shot, a great rebounder, and a great overall player. You know, some wing guys on that Xavier team that make life difficult. It's a week where you expect 2 wins, but that game on the road at Xavier is a tough ask.
Well, and definitely don't overlook DePaul. I mean,
Right.
For sure, the Cintas Center in Cincinnati is going to be rocking. Villanova is always the game, I'm sure, that's first circled on the calendar, maybe after the Cincinnati game for Xavier fans. But that DePaul game, despite recent struggles, it's still a better team than the DePaul has had. I expect some of the excitement from the non-conference part of the season and leading into Big East play to still be there. And then Kevin hit it earlier that we have struggled when a team has a guy. And Charlie Moore lit us up in the Pavilion a month ago. And so the question will be, who do we put on him? Is it Sadiq? Can we lock him down? And I think you know, any coach will tell you that you don't guard a star player with just one guy. So can their better cohesive unit of a defense, which we've seen in recent weeks, since that DePaul game, can that come through in the clutch? I think that DePaul game certainly shouldn't be overlooked. As you said, they took us to overtime last time, and they have a great player like Charlie Moore. And then the Cintas Center, of course, will be a great atmosphere and is always a tough place to play.
Yeah, and you mentioned the DePaul star there, right? And the star power at the top of the roster. Let's talk about the star power at the bottom of the roster. Pantelias Gitas, the stud there at the end of the bench, who, by the way, got into it with the Villanova student section, was the man.
He is hilarious.
Back in late January. He will be there in his home environment, if you will, his natural habitat, and love that kid. Just absolutely love him. He's the best. So it's top to bottom on that DePaul roster, and it'll be a tough one on Wednesday. Looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, and top to bottom on the Big East too. We just talk about that Villanova going through the gauntlet, right? You play Creighton, you play Marquette, you play Seton Hall, you play Butler, and then all of a sudden, you got to go on the road to Chicago and to Cincinnati to play Xavier and DePaul, and it doesn't get a whole lot easier, and that just gets me really excited for mid-March when all these teams are going to be heading up to New York together. And it, quite honestly, it wouldn't shock me if any one of these teams came away with this. I mean, if you tell me that DePaul's going to win it, maybe I'd be a little bit more surprised. But there's nothing outside of the realm of possibility. All these teams have a shot to be playing in March, playing for an NCAA title. And I'm just really excited for a league that top to bottom has probably not ever had this much parity in the Big East.
Yeah, and you talk about heading towards the Big East tournament. Should be a great one up there in New York. And this one is by way of Tom Trainer. And since we're doing it, we got to segue it in there. They go up to Madison Square Garden for the Big East tournament. Does Jay Wright come back?
Yes. That was a great segue. Yes, as well. Yeah, Jay comes back. I don't think the Knicks are of any interest to him. I had heard earlier in the day that it was not a mutual interest, and I believe that. I believe, one, that I think my money would be on Jay staying at Villanova forever. And I think that if there were anything to take him away from Villanova, it would be the job for that other basketball team at the Wells Fargo Center. So I don't see him leaving for New York. There's speculation because he and Patty's house in Berwyn is up for sale. Supposedly they're downsizing, but there's some questions about what does that mean. Reading between the lines, should we not? I don't think he's going anywhere again unless those 10-9-8 76ers give him a call.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing there, right? Could he leverage it to kind of pin Mark Jackson to the chair a little bit and try to get him to give him, whether it's a raise or a new facility or some combination of both, or more money for his assistants, right? Those things happen all the time. The other talk show that we have here in this studio and on this network is the Penn State, the Nittany Lion Sports Report. We talk about Penn State football. James Franklin has done that each of the last 3 years, and I don't know that there was necessarily no chance that he was going to leave, but it sure felt like he was just using it as leverage, which most importantly was to get money for his assistants, which he has done, brought in very solid new assistants this year with the exodus of a few, and I just wonder if there is any legs whatsoever, does he leverage it to get a raise for himself or a raise for his assistants or additions to the Davis Center locker room, etc. Other facilities involved with the program. Just a thought, absolutely nothing to that, conjecture, but it's something that we promised we would hit, and now we have, and I think we can move on with Jay as the long-term head of Villanova basketball. However, we do this whenever we talk about it, so Tom, I don't think you were here the last time. If he were to move on, who would you like to bring in to lead the program? Oh, now I caught you off guard.
Do you think you necessarily bring somebody in?
I don't know. I'm asking you the question.
Well, I think, the question might be inexperience, but I think Halkovich, I think, would be a guy that has been there long enough, has been a part of 2 national championship teams, has seen the program build from the dark ages till now. But I think the knock would be inexperience.
Sure. Kevin knows my 2 guys, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, we talked about this a few weeks ago on the show.
Yeah.
I at least know we know one guy who is my favorite as well, which is Baker Dunleavy.
Mm-hmm.
He was, a quality assistant coach for a long time.
Best developer of the big men that Villanova's had in a long time.
Absolutely. And now doing some good things over at Quinnipiac, and I think he would be the next predecessor to or successor to Jay Wright.
Mhm.
That's a good point, Kev. I don't see it being somebody not from Jay's coaching tree.
Yeah, and that's why my second guy was Ashley Howard.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they'd be able to. I think they would be able to pull him from LaSalle. It's just interesting going across town. Besides, say, Fran Dunphy, you haven't seen much of that here in Philadelphia. But I certainly think that Ashley Howard would make the move if Villanova wanted him to. Excellent recruiter, really good coach, knows Philadelphia as well as anybody, including Jay Wright. That would be another excellent hire. Those are my guys. Baker and Ash.
I don't think the question is if they would make the move. I think it's the question of who Villanova would prefer.
Sure. Yep. 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 And of the two, I'd prefer Baker. And I have contended that since they were both on staff. I've contended it since Baker left. And I still contend it to this day that I would go 1-1A, but Baker 1, Ashley 1A. Just blessed to have two guys like that come through the program and now leaving their mark on different programs. Ashley Howard, awesome to have him in Philadelphia. Such a great representation of what Philly basketball is all about, and hopefully that he continues to grow his career, whether at LaSalle or elsewhere. And Villanova can only be so lucky when the time came to have somebody like him at the helm. So, anyway, just thought it was...
that was a very comforting discussion.
Yeah.
You leave it thinking, oh, well, they'd be in good hands.
That's right.
They'd be in good hands. So
No doubt about it.
That was great. Could have been an Allstate commercial.
Yes, that's right. Well, with that said, we're going to leave you in good hands with our sponsors here as we head to a quick commercial break. And then we're going to bring you our V's and O's segment. And we're going to talk about Villanova and one particular offensive possession that, for me, defined the second half. But you saw a lot of those same concepts throughout the majority of the second half. And that led to them teeing off from three, taking high percentage looks from deep, and making a whole bunch of them. And that led them to victory. And we're going to explore that. And something for everybody to watch and keep an eye on is that ball movement when we go to, whenever we turn on to our televisions on Wednesday night when they take on DePaul. So stay with us. Tom Trainer, Kevin Long, Bob Long here for Bob Long Sports and the Villanova Basketball Report.
Dunphy Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation, our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dunphyford.com.
Come experience the Dunphy difference. You'll be glad you did.
V's and O's is a segment where we take a look at the whiteboard and go through one aspect of Villanova basketball and break it down right here, X's and O's type format. And today we're going to talk about the game against Temple, Villanova's second half output, largely driven by hitting the three-point shot. And one play in particular, one offensive possession really struck a chord for me, and it's going to involve 9 seconds, 7 passes, and 4 dribbles, and 1 wide-open three-point shot. And I think this is emblematic of Villanova's basketball offense at its best. So Colin Gillespie, off a semi-rush opportunity, a semi-transition, takes the ball down the floor here. He ends up right here. His back is to the basket, defended by Temple, and each of these players across Sadiq Bey, Brandon Slater, Jermaine Samuels, Jeremiah Robinson, Earl. Right? And so the man-to-man defense allows Gillespie here with this defender sagging off Sadiq Bey and this defender sagging a bit off Brandon Slater. Gillespie starts by passing the ball here. So that's number 1, right? And then Sadiq Bey, without blinking, moves the ball to Brandon Slater. That's pass number 2. Brandon Slater then passes it to Colin Gillespie. He's going to tick out here. Here's Colin Gillespie, right? So that's pass number 3. And again, this all in the span of 9 seconds. Gillespie now is going to dribble this ball. He gets 2 dribbles into the lane here, jump stop, finds Jeremiah Robinson Earl with the 4th pass as this defender is now sagging off him. Robinson Earl very quickly here to Jermaine Samuels. That's pass number 5. And again, these defenders are working, trying to catch up to these Villanova players. The ball movement is too quick. Now Jermaine Samuels, he's going to take 2 dribbles here. He works his way into the lane. That's pass number, well, he gets to the point here, and now he's going to, as Slater comes out this way, Saddiq Bey comes here. Pass number 6 right here to Brandon Slater. That's pass number 6. And then Colin Gillespie through this is moving over to here, replacing where Bey was before. Bey with the 7th pass right back to Colin Gillespie. He's wide open for 3, and he hits it. So again, 9 seconds, 7 passes, 4 dribbles, and 1 open 3-point shot. This in a game that was an 11-point game at the time. With about 6.5 minutes left, it became a 14-point game. And this is a play that's emblematic of what Villanova does so well. So yeah, okay. This is a little bit, no doubt about it, it's a little bit messy on here. But let's try this one more time from the top. Gillespie, back to the basket, finds Bey. Bey moves it to Slater. Slater back to Colin Gillespie, who checks in here, dribbles inside, gets it going to Robinson Earl, over to Jermaine Samuels. He dribbles in here. Jump stop. Villanova's so good at utilizing the jump stop. Now Bey checks out here. Pass comes here. Gillespie out here. Extra pass. 7 passes, 9 seconds. And a wide open 3-point shot. This is the Villanova offense that has built a program to win 2 national championships, a whole bunch of Big East titles in the last 5 years, and has escalated Jay Wright to the top of the coaching echelon in college basketball and beyond. It's this type of motion offense. Bear in mind, Colin Gillespie, the point guard, is the only player inside the 3-point line when this play develops. And that creates the spacing for these passes. It allows the defenders, they think they have to sag off because any of these guys can beat them to the basket. And then the quick ball movement forces these players out of position and allows Villanova to get involved and inside on the penetration, where they can either go all the way to the hole, force a secondary defender, and then kick, or they can just pivot, which they do so well, and wait for an off-ball cutter. And that's the beauty of the 4-out, 1-in offense, and the beauty of having a guy like Colin Gillespie, a point guard, strong enough, smart enough, and a good enough passer to run his sets from back to the basket type looks and create looks like that. That's the Villanova offense that I'm used to seeing. That's the Villanova offense that leads to wins and titles. And that is the Villanova offense you should be looking to see over the course of this year as Jeremiah Robinson Earl gets more experience. Jermaine Samuels continues to build the basketball IQ. Saddiq Bey continues to have a phenomenal year. And then Brandon Slater, this could be Justin Moore. You could input Cole Swider into this mix. Any of these guys can spread the floor that way, some of them better shooters than others. But really, the driver of the engine is Colin Gillespie. And this is the Villanova offense that will allow them to be successful over the rest of this year. So that's our V's and O's report here. We'll take it back to the studio in just a few minutes. Bob Long, Kevin Long, Tom Trainer here. Thanks, everybody, for being with us on the Villanova Basketball Report. And this was V's and O's.
Dunphy Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation, our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dunphyford.com.
Come experience the Dunphy difference. You'll be glad you did.
Welcome back inside the Villanova Basketball Report. Bob Long, Kevin Long, Tom Trainer, no longer with us, but I appreciate his time. Great insight from Tom over the first half of the show, and I know you had some thoughts as well here, Kevin, on the V's and O's segment.
Yeah, great as always to have Tom back on the show. I think that was the first time that all three of us have done this together since probably the 2018 season. So,
and that was a national championship here. So, coincidence? I think not.
We'll see. But when you were talking especially about Colin Gillespie and the way that he's able to put his back to the basket and he's able to make some plays while being down there, it reminds me a lot of the days of Jalen Brunson. That's what he would always do. He wasn't necessarily the biggest guy or the fastest guy or the strongest guy. And Colin Gillespie in a lot of ways reminds me of Jalen Brunson, the way that he's able to use his body to create space for others and himself when he's down low able to play with his back to the basket, and then ends up finding himself a hole to slip into, and then he's open for a 3-point shot. So, this is the way that these Jay Wright teams have played for a long time now. They understand when to make that extra pass in order to get, maybe from an open shot to a wide open shot. And these guys without hesitation will make that pass to their teammate and, get that basket, get an easy hoop. So, great V's and O's segment. I think you hit the nail on the head with Jay Wright, his philosophy and these guys. And, I'm excited to see more of that as we get into the home stretch of the season here.
Yep, no doubt about it. And interesting here, Ryan Lennox, by the way, the radio producer for Villanova Basketball Radio through Fox Sports and also through 610 ESPN. That's the channel. Fox Sports Media Group is who actually produces the broadcast. But he said that he thinks Swider's ready to make a statement. And I can certainly understand that because he's been struggling at times, but we talk about the game slowing down to these guys. I mean, you mentioned the whiteboard and some of the different guys getting involved. Swider can be that next guy. He just needs to continue to get stronger. A great three-point shooter, to have that fourth guy on the floor that can hit the three is big. And he thinks Justin Moore as well. And I couldn't agree more on Justin Moore. He is a phenomenal player who should be a starter on a regular basis. It's just a size thing, I suppose. He's playing starter minutes, not always in a starter role, but he's phenomenal.
Yeah, he certainly has made a contribution right off the bat. The only thing I'll say about Justin Moore is maybe doesn't always fall into that philosophy of make that extra pass for the wide open guy. He's still learning. I don't take that as a detriment to him as a person or as a basketball player or anything, but he is still learning that. He has a little bit of that Phil Booth in him right now.
It's got to be something with the number, right?
It has to be the number. That must be it. But, hey, the guy shoots well. Those times when you would say to Phil Booth, like, no, don't shoot that ball, and it goes in, you see that, almost just as often from Justin Moore. So having a great freshman campaign, nothing more that we could ask from him. And as for Cole Swider, that Jay Wright is in his ear right now saying, keep taking the shots, keep throwing them up. You're a great shooter. Just keep it rolling. It's going to fall for you. Things are going to fall in line for you because you can tell at the end of some of those games, like you think back to the Creighton game where he was, looking a little shaky. Looks like his confidence is shaken, and he comes back in the next game and he's catching and shooting right away. He maybe has a guy right up in his face, but he's catching and shooting. So clearly he's getting some confidence in his shot. Jay Wright is saying all the right things to him, and I think as we see him start to hit some of those shots, he's going to build some confidence in himself and hopefully provide some much-needed depth for this team down the stretch.
Good stuff. You talk about freshman and sophomore campaigns for this Villanova team. It's now time for Cats in the Wild, where we go to the NBA, break down some of the young and old Villanova Wildcats, but I get the sense that you might be talking about some youngsters this week. Cats in the Wild.
Absolutely, Bob. That is correct. And we've alluded to it several times on this show who this guy might be over the course of the season, and that's Eric Paschall. Having a great campaign in his rookie season, 13.5 points a game, 4.5 rebounds a game for the Golden State Warriors, who are overall struggling right now, but allowing Eric the opportunity to show what he can do. Got selected for the Futures game this past weekend at the All-Star Weekend and scored 23 points for the USA team in that game. So very encouraging to see Eric going up against some of the top talent in the league, some of the top young talent, and performing so well. So it's been a great season so far. It was a great weekend for Eric and a great weekend to get himself some exposure and a guy who really has just almost come out of nowhere, a guy that you may not have expected to have the kind of success early in his career. You saw the 3 first-rounders the previous year in Jalen Brunson, who was probably one of the best, if not the best, all-time Villanova basketball player, and nobody having more success right now in the NBA than Eric Paschall, save maybe Kyle Lowry, who has done it for a long time.
Yes, and took 2 charges in the All-Star game. That was phenomenal. And Jay Wright even gave him a shout-out on Twitter, which was I guess expected. I mean, that's Villanova basketball, All-Star game or not. How about that? People were not enjoying it, though.
Absolutely.
People were saying on Twitter that he should simultaneously win the All-Star game MVP and never be allowed to come back to the All-Star game for taking 2 charges in the key moments of the game.
That's Villanova basketball, man. They don't give up. I mean, I will tell you, watching that Toronto Raptors 76ers series last year in the playoffs was heartbreaking because he was that guy always taking those charges, and it's that thing that you love when you're a Villanova basketball fan, but when you're on the other end of it, it's not so great. But that's what Jay has always preached. And going back to Villanova, you think about Temple when Villanova's up by 20 and Chris Arcidiacono gets a chance to get in the game, and he's diving on the floor to get a ball, and that's just that Villanova attitude, and it's always great to see at any level.
Yeah, so we'll see if that attitude continues to carry on. The number 12 team in the country still chasing Penn State for the second week in a row. Just has to be stated. It simply must be stated. Last week when Penn State was ranked above Villanova, it was the first time in the history of the AP poll that Penn State was the top-ranked team in the state of Pennsylvania. Either Duquesne, LaSalle, or Villanova. As you might imagine, most of those times when Penn State was ranked, it was Villanova ranked ahead of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the first time in the history of the AP poll that they were the top-ranked team in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. So this is now the second week, and they're playing right now. As soon as we close up shop here, we're going to catch the second half of that one. So that should be fun. Penn State playing here today. For those of you followers of our Nittany Lions Sports Report, you also know that I am as diehard of a Penn State fan as it gets. So very happy to see the Nittany Lions play well. And, boy, a 4 versus 5 second-round matchup. That would be something else between Villanova and Penn State.
That would be pretty special. A battle that is starting to brew here in the state of Pennsylvania and for recruiting in the city of Philadelphia.
And a former Jay Wright assistant in Pat Chambers, one of those other guys that we talk about from that tree. Pat Chambers, longtime assistant here at Villanova, the first Final Four run in 2009. First Final Four run in recent memory, that is. That was with Pat on the staff.
That's right, and you have to think that now he's in a pretty good situation that, Villanova is definitely a higher basketball prestige school, but would he be looking to leave his situation? You're probably, if not definitely, in the best college basketball conference in the country right now, playing with team number 2 in that conference, looking strong. Is there a reason for him to leave? So that would be another interesting wrinkle should Jay Wright fall to another team.
Boy, it is just amazing. College basketball is amazing, and everything you said was exactly correct about Pat Chambers and in the conference and would he jump. I think he would, but let's just say he wouldn't. If he goes 500 this year, he's gone. He would have been fired from Penn State. That's my opinion. But I've been led to believe that from a lot of factors. And there were a lot of folks that thought in Happy Valley and Penn State country that he should have been gone 2, 3, 4 years ago. And then he was given way too long of a leash. If Lamar Stevens declares for the NBA last year, does he get fired after this year? What does this season look like for Penn State? It's just, man, you want to go into that profession because you get paid a whole bunch of money and there's a lot of prestige and it's a sport you love. But my goodness, that is a tough profession. That we're talking about the difference between Pat Chambers being fired from Penn State after this year because he hasn't really taken the steps, but again, at a program where there's no history, not great facilities, they don't even own the Bryce Jordan Center. I mean, there's a lot of drawbacks and detractions from that job. But now we're talking about him as potentially coach of the year in college basketball and a guy who wouldn't leave Penn State for Villanova, potentially. Wow. Coaching is a fickle profession at the college level.
Quite a 360, and very, very surprising to see what Penn State has done. And yeah, you said it. It's essentially out of the control of the coach. There are certainly things that they can do. They can recruit. They can institute a game plan, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the players being there. Lamar Stevens coming back, being ready to play, and going out and playing against some of the best competition in the country in the Big Ten. And, they could have gone 500 in the Big Ten and still be possibly a tournament team. And, maybe he's not viewed as the same light, but here they are having an outstanding season, 20-5, and, really going strong in the Big Ten right now. I believe second in the conference, I want to say.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And a chance to jump Maryland at some point as well. Going to be a wild finish to the season. This is the Villanova Basketball Report live here on Bob Long Sports. Bob Long, Kevin Long. Again, the games this week at DePaul on Wednesday evening at 9 o'clock, and then at Xavier on Saturday afternoon. Should be a lot of fun. Should be a great weekend for Villanova basketball, looking to win 4 straight if they take both of those. Kevin, any other things that we didn't hit before we get out of here?
No, nothing else. The only other thing I would add is just, these 2 games, can't take them lightly. It's going to be difficult to go on the road and win these games, and if they come not ready to play, they will certainly get beat. They cannot afford to have a slow start to the first half like they've had in a lot of these games recently, so I'm looking for them to come out strong and hopefully carry that through the games in this next week here.
Thanks, everybody, for being with us here this week on the Villanova Basketball Report. Bob Long, Kevin Long here in studio. Tom Trainer was in for the first extended segment. We appreciate his time, but most importantly, appreciate everybody watching. We're available on YouTube at Bob Long Sports, Facebook and Twitter at Bob Long Sports, and on SoundCloud as well. You guessed it, Bob Long Sports. You can get involved with what we're doing, stay involved with the programming. Our broadcast season has just about come to an end. Only Swarthmore basketball continues on, as they are still the #1 team in the country at the D3 level. You can check out those broadcasts on boblongsports.com or swarthmoreathletics.com. Drexel hockey on the way to nationals, so happy for them. And LaSalle basketball came up just 1 game short of the Philadelphia Catholic League playoffs. A valiant effort down the stretch from that team. Those semifinals are tomorrow night at the Palestra. Should be a whole bunch of fun. Archbishop Bryan, upstart team taking on Newman Goretti. That would be an upset, but excited for that one. And then Roman Catholic against Archbishop Wood, the game of the year earlier on in the conference. Make that the league. Philadelphia Catholic League. Rematches here. That was a double overtime thriller, and now they'll play it on a neutral floor at the Cathedral of College Basketball, the Palestra. So that's a little walk around what's going on in Bob Long Sports, but appreciate those of you that are checking in on the Villanova side, and we'll be back next week for our show. Again, Kevin Long, Tom Trainer, alongside me, Bob Long, saying so long here from Bluebell, our studios here for Bob Long Sports. We'll see everybody next time. Thanks so much.